Hey, hey everyone, greetings. It's Naomi Wolf with Outspoken. Sorry for the wet hair, ill-timed shower, but I didn't want to be late for you. My Thursday at noon East Coast time Substack and everything else podcast. And so as promised, so I hope you're all doing great today. Thanks for tuning in. As promised, this is my reading of the essay I wrote this past week on Substack, which has generated a lot of comment, which is good, pretty supportive generally. I think the minefield of talking about these issues, in my view, I traversed it successfully. We'll see what you think. But it basically, I'm a lifelong liberal. I still think I'm a liberal. Liberalism may have left me far behind, but I think I'm a liberal, right? With, some conservative leanings. But I'm an anti-racist. Like, that's just clear. And I believe that, being an anti-racist is necessary if you're going to be aligned with freedom in general, right? And human rights, the rule of law, dignity of everyone. It means not discriminating on the basis of race in either direction, right? Gender, sexual orientation. It doesn't mean special rights or privileges for anyone. It doesn't mean reverse racism. It doesn't mean any of that. It's an old-fashioned Martin Luther King's ideal, Booker T. Washington's ideal of a society that rewards and honors merit and does not discriminate against people on the basis of race. However, we're in a really, that conversation worked well in America when the different races were all American, right? And acculturated to become American if they were legal immigrants, self-selected, loving America if they were legal immigrants, and also, if they were Americans, of different races, we could have, and we should have, and we did have many, many debates about systemic racism, lingering racism. It wasn't until 1964 with the Equal Rights Act in America that the races became legally equal and had equal opportunity. But that was, it was easy to be a blanket anti-racist. Well, it should still be easy to be a blanket anti-racist. But the point is, when you're a bunch of Americans with a shared culture arguing about race, there are certain, it's very easy to keep the focus on getting rid of racism, right? Or systemic racism or racial discrimination. However, we're in a very different time now in which millions and millions of people, some of them no doubt very, very nice. And that's the trouble with any kind of generalization based on where people come from. But I'll get into that. Many, many people are coming to the West, and I'll, stick to the US in this essay, but it's applicable, I think, to Britain and to France and to Italy and to Spain and to Germany and to Australia and Canada. Many millions of people are literally being shipped or airlifted or walking, right, in the Biden era across the border into Western countries who come from cultures whose worldviews are like night and day different from a Western worldview about a number of issues. But some of the key ones include the role of women and the role of gay people, and also how you deal with conflict. And so it's very difficult to talk about this without sounding racist, right? And you also have to be careful not to be racist, right? Just because someone comes from Afghanistan doesn't mean he or she, innately, inevitably, as an individual, carries with him or her worldview that's incompatible with the West. And I'm not trying to take that position in this essay. However, I also know that we're really in danger in the West if we don't create a new discourse around these differences. And that's why the title of this essay is "It's Not Racist to be Culturist," because the cudgel of you are a racist. It is racist to talk about these differences. It's racist to notice them, right? Is leveled against anyone who tries to say, hey, wait a minute. I see there are grooming gangs that are of Pakistani origin targeting white girls in Britain, which I know two of the survivors, Samantha Woodhouse and Samantha Smith, of these grooming gangs, rape gangs, rape trafficking gangs, sexual abuse of minors gangs. And those women who have been through it are furious that it can't be discussed because racism. Okay, that's not the central issue, right? And also, I guess I would just say that this fear in the West of being called racist, if you say, hey, wait a minute, millions of people are coming from nations and cultures that strip women of all legal rights and hang gay people from cranes or torture them in prison. Let's pause for a minute and think this through. If they're, right-thinking people, certainly liberal people, are absolutely terrified to say that because you'll immediately get canceled and targeted or tarred with an epithet that no one wants, including not me, which is racist. But I would say that the globalists who are trying to destroy Western cultures, sovereign nations, which have just as much right to exist as, West African sovereign nations or Islamic sovereign nations, count on our apprehensions about this and our delicacy about it and our fears about it to keep, I think, weaponizing human beings en masse in a very, very cynical way. I don't think it's, I think it's pretty racist of the globalists to say, let's just drop millions of fighting age men from Somalia and Afghanistan and Liberia into the West and Pakistan, rural Pakistan, so that we can shatter the cultural and sovereign cohesion of the nations of the West so that we can rule them more effectively, which is, and subjugate them, which is clearly what's happening, right? I don't think anyone can look at what's happening and avoid that conclusion. I get lots of comments about my hair falling in my face. This morning, I'm just going to say, please give me a pass because I didn't have time to dry my hair, spray my hair, put a headband in my hair. Just bear with me with the hair, okay? So that's what this essay is about. And so what I'm trying to create is a new discourse that right-thinking, anti-racist people can use that will liberate them to talk about the fact that women's rights are really, really, really in danger in the West when millions of people who don't believe in women's rights are imported into the West with their own parallel societies intact and their own goal being hegemony, not to coexist, but to take over institutions, elect their own people. And I used to think this was a crazy exaggeration when people on the right said it, but to pass, for instance, Sharia law, or, as we're seeing in Britain and in America, to have publicly funded schools observing Ramadan and Eid and other Muslim holidays, whereas there's supposed to be a separation of church and state in the United States. So this poses a genuine danger. And the other thing that drives me crazy as a feminist, when people are scared to talk about this, and it, in the terms that it really requires, the danger to women in the West of importing millions of people who don't believe in women's rights as the West defines it, right, is that I'm a feminist and I'm a student of women's history and, deeply student of women's history. And I've also traveled quite a bit in these countries, which a lot of people who are scared to talk about it, haven't done or don't want to talk about it or think it'll all work out. And as a student of women's history, it took centuries for the West to evolve. And many people fought and suffered and were imprisoned and force-fed, right, for benchmark legislation like the Married Women's Property Act in Britain, or parallel laws in the United States that finally allowed married women not to be chattel, right? To have property of their own. Custody rights. Women used to lose their children if a marriage broke up. Marital rape that didn't used to exist. The rulings against marital rape are literally at the end of the last century, in America and Britain. Laws that protect the rights of gay people. Those are recent, 60s, late 60s, early 60s in Britain, late 60s in America, 1960s, right? Hundreds of years it took women and gay men and lesbians. Actually, lesbians faced different hurdles, not so much legal discrimination because they were assumed not to really exist, believe it or not, in the law. But gay men, have faced horrific legal discrimination that ended very, very recently. And again, women have, only recently gained property rights, custody rights, the right not to be raped in marriage, and the right in principle to have safety from rape from a random rapist through the judicial system. And what I'm seeing in Britain, it's further along than in the United States, but that's scary enough because Britain used to be a very safe country in many ways. In my own lifetime, when I was a student there in the 80s, and then again up until 2015, what I'm seeing is that there's a systematic weakening through criminal justice decisions and through policies, right, like the one I mentioned about public schools, to weaken women's rights in the West, and next it'll be gay rights, to align with Islamist worldviews around what women should be, who has the right to their bodies. And I guess what I'm arguing in this is that it's racist not to be culturist because, and bear with me while I flip the script a little, but it's important. The notion that, Western culture or Western norms are so powerful and enduring and right that you can ship people with totally opposite views of the world to our shores and they magically participate in these cultural norms is really racist, I think, because it is kind of a colonialist mentality, right? Like, ooh, bingo, you've arrived in New Jersey. You believe women are entitled to sex before marriage and to walk around with their arms and legs bared. It really is insulting in a way to the deeply held, and I've traveled to these countries, so I know, and I kind of respect this in a horrible way. I don't want to live there, but the worldviews that people, I would say, especially men from, West and Central Africa, and we'll talk about that, many men, I'm not going to say all, from West and Central Africa or from rural Pakistan or from Afghanistan, the worldviews they bring are very deeply held, just as deeply held as ours are. And, just as we're sure that it's right and good for women to have sexual freedom and property rights and to walk around dressed however they want, it's as deeply held, if not more deeply held, that it's men's responsibility in those cultures to end that, to shred that, to block that, and to punish women who do that. And the same is true for homosexuals, which is why I know that the Red Green Alliance is like really giving that issue a pass right now. But I would really say to gay people on the left and in the center and on the right, beware, because it is so illegal to be gay in these countries from which these millions of immigrants are coming, and in their worldview and in their religion and belief system. And doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but that worldview is homosexuality, male homosexuality especially, is supposed to be punished severely. And in some countries, it's been a capital offense. So all of this is to say, I'm going to read the essay, but all of this is to say it's racist to pretend that other cultures are just like ours. and it's, in my view, and it's racist to pretend that all will be well. We can keep our values and norms around equality, dignity, the rule of law, freedom for women, freedom for gay people, safety of children, if we just import millions of people who literally don't think those are good things, right? And have a fully developed worldview about why those are not good things. Those are things to be battled against and overcome. So that's it. And my intention in writing this essay is to really liberate people, because I'm an anti-racist and I still think I'm a liberal, right? To liberate people to be able to say, hey, I'm not a racist, but this cultural norm is not something we should be importing wholesale into our country. Let's slow down. Let's redefine what our own cultural norms are before we destroy them with the mass immigration of people who literally, we've got to respect the fact that they do not, many of them do not, and as cultures, right, and in some ways as religions, do not share these norms. All right. And also, like, I wish people would stop being so naive about how many centuries it took to secure these rights in the United States and in Britain. Sorry for the hair. All right, let's go ahead to the essay, and I'm going to share my screen so you can follow along if you like. And there we go. This is Front Page Magazine. It's not racist to be a culturist. In fact, it is racist not to be. And Jamie Glazoff, the editor, put together an AI illustration of the essay, which I think is fascinating because AI is so terrifying. AI reconstructed, or maybe Jamie's psychic, but I think it's something of both, the exact location that this event took place, and only got my dog wrong. And I don't even know how this happened, but AI reconstructed exactly where my beach blanket was. All right, here we go. Spooky. We are living in a time of all-out culture war, but you are not supposed to mention that or to talk about it because you will at once be labeled a racist. And I'll stop sharing the screen now, but I will keep reading. I will argue, though, that this is a dangerous rhetorical tactic to accept. I will note that it is racist, in fact, not to face the fact that we are in a battle of cultures. It is racist, I will argue, to pretend that we are all just bodies that can be moved harmlessly from place to place en masse, and that alien cultures are not threatening to us, and that, as Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez put it in Munich, in her effort to rebut Secretary of State Marco Rubio's warnings about the loss of the West, culture is, quote, thin. End quote. It is racist to presume that when you transport bodies from point A to point B, you have solved the problem of radically and deeply felt very diverse cultures, which often mean radically diverse worldviews, gender relations, family organization, and attitudes toward violence. You have not solved it, as different cultures bring with them radically diverse consciousnesses. If you study recorded history, you know that most of it has been a war of cultures. Resources were usually at the root of the conflict or conquest, but culture was the mechanism for lasting dominance. Why was the Roman Empire always suppressing the worship of non-Roman gods? Because of the lingering power of subjugated cultures and deities. When colonized peoples kept their own faith traditions, their own festivals, their own modes of education and dress, they were far more difficult to subdue, and it was far more difficult to maintain a common empire spanning peoples, languages, and geography. Why were pagan Celtic sacred groves and hilltops in England renamed for Roman deities and then eventually renamed in turn for Christian saints? Rulers knew that you had to diminish competing cultures in order to solidify political power. Part of the Iberian Peninsula was held by Islamic forces for 700 years. Jews and Christians lived there under restrictions. When King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella secured control in the 15th century on behalf of the Catholic Church of what would become modern Spain, which, by the way, is now importing 500,000 to 1 million Moroccans and people from sub-Saharan Africa, they drove Muslims out. This was the Reconquista of 1492. They expelled Jews, forcing the ones who remained to convert, and violently enforced Catholic orthodoxy. Literally all of history is the history of cultural conflict, and all victors' stories are the stories of their enforcement of some level of cultural hegemony. In the modern period, European nations could comfortably strive for equality under law for citizens of all religions because the cultures of post-1789 modern France, or of post-1848 modern Switzerland, or of post-1861 modern Italy were relatively homogeneous and strong. In all of this, America shone as an extraordinary example and exception among nations. We were founded not upon a native ancient tribal identity such as Italian or French, but upon an ideology of freedom and the rule of law. Nonetheless, our culture of liberty was so strong and unifying that we could absorb people from many different countries and identities and turn them all into Americans. Additionally, for most of our history, the people who sought to immigrate to America wanted deeply to join in that ideology of freedom and longed above all to become truly American. Then came the 21st century, and we witnessed and are witnessing an experiment, nation-altering, that has never taken place before in human history. It has certainly never taken place successfully. Millions of people from other very different cultures and ideologies, people who in these cases were not particularly motivated by an attraction to the ideals of Western Europe or of the United States, indeed in many cases who overtly stated that they hated those ideals and who stood in warrior-like opposition to them, were airlifted into those nations or shipped in wholesale by globalist interests to be resettled in Western Europe and Canada and in the United States. Never, ever, ever has a nation in recorded history, ancient or modern, survived the wholesale importation of millions of outsiders from alien cultures that are hostile to the values of the host culture. Can you name one? Can you? Think about it. Any Babylonian in the 7th century BCE, any Spartan or Athenian in the 5th century BCE, any Christian living in Constantinople in the 4th century or riding to the Holy Land for the Crusades in the 13th century would have looked on all this with horror, knowing exactly what would happen. He or she would have known what would happen because this knowledge has been part of conflict in human history for as long as humans have walked the planet. The host culture, of course, would be overrun, its nation altered beyond recognition, and it would soon collapse. Its centers of worship, its houses, squares, and walled cities would all be inhabited and built over by the incomers. Its statues would be toppled, its coins and artwork defaced, its cemeteries and altars would be given over to weeds and vines. But somehow, today, you can't raise concerns about any of this, as you will be silenced with the epithet racist. It is urgent to reject this sneaky rhetorical framing that is engineered to guarantee supineness in the host nations that are being deliberately overrun in order to collapse them. It is urgent to embrace and defend the position that none of this concern has anything to do with race, which, by the way, is an imaginary construct in the first place. It was kind of invented in the 13th century in the West. And that indeed it is not racist to be culturist. It is okay, it is even now urgently necessary to be culturist. Here is what I mean. I was lying last summer on a beach towel. I was wearing a bathing suit. I was resting on the green, grassy slope that faces a still lake located about 15 minutes from our house in the Hudson Valley. The lake is in a little wilderness area, a public state park. Evergreens clothe the low hills that form a backdrop to the grassy slopes that surround the water. There is a little snack bar. There is a little brick set of changing rooms. It is a bucolic little American setting, unchanged for decades. I've gone to that state park for 23 years. When I was a single mother, I often brought my kids as it was so pleasant and safe. My then small son would join other delighted little boys in chasing the schools of guppies that flickered tantalizingly in the shallow waiting area. My then young daughter would quietly fill her bucket with sand or work out the elaborate relationships between her stuffed animals that we had brought from home. Other parents and children rested or played near us. The lily pads swayed, the sun rippled on the deep green water. Older people might chat briefly about the weather as you passed by to and from the snack bar or the water, smiling at you from their lawn chairs. Young couples shared beers after long weeks of hard work. Sometimes in those days, I would bring our dog, stubby-legged little Mushroom. He would lie next to us on the beach towel and nap in the sun or look solemnly at the birds rising and descending over the water. It was utterly peaceful. There was no conflict, and I was afraid of nothing. My children feared nothing. No one judged me. No one said, "Where is your husband?" No one disapproved of me or approved of me. It was no one's job to control or monitor me. We were all Americans together. We shared those values so closely, we hardly noticed what we were sharing. We did not have to discuss or defend it. We were free. The stillness and peace and calmness and safety of American freedom, shared among other Americans in a public setting, is something so precious and unique you scarcely notice it until it is gone. But there I was, as I say, last summer, sunbathing and reading in my bright green bathing suit. It was a fairly modest one-piece bathing suit. My kids were grown now, and I was alone with Loki. Brian had left for a while to do an errand and would pick me up later. Suddenly, I felt Loki tug at the leash. I looked up and saw a 4-year-old girl in full Afghani dress, a long pink cotton gown with long sleeves draped over white trousers, was pulling away from her father. I saw that a 4-year-old girl was pulling away from her father. She was enchanted at the sight of Loki. To my left, I saw that there was a group of Afghani nationals who appeared to have recently arrived. They stood around a picnic table, the women working on setting up the meal. Their clothing was all apparently hand-sewn, as if they had not been in this country long enough to change out of what they had brought with them. There were 3 women. It was difficult to tell their ages as they were heavily swaddled in what must have been 90-degree heat. The women's faces were covered with black niqabs, their heads swathed in black. Their long white and gray gowns revealed additional layers of fabric underneath. Their arms were covered down to the fingers. They looked over at me and Loki, longingly, resentfully, it was impossible to tell, as they set out food on the picnic table. An elderly man in white trousers and a tunic with a white beard stood guard, as it seemed, over the women. A younger man in his late 30s, the father of the little girl, and a second white-bearded man were both, I saw, now standing at some different distance from Loki and me. The little girl pulled harder on her father's hand, as she, naturally enough, wanted to pet Loki. I sat up, prepared to say the pleasant things you say as a dog owner to a parent when a child wants to pet your pup. Then I saw the father drag his daughter angrily away from Loki as she protested. The white-bearded man, though, walked right up to me. He confronted me, standing at the very edge of my beach towel. There was a weird moment in which we looked speechlessly into each other's eyes. I waited. I wasn't moving. I wasn't leaving. Then he looked at my legs, my bare arms, my entire body, and then at my dog with absolutely undisguised hatred and contempt. For what seemed like long minutes, he communicated wordlessly, standing now entirely in my physical space, glaring at me with a stony hostility, almost rage, a fury that I have never felt before, that he thoroughly disapproved of everything about me at that moment. Then he turned away, back to his better behaved, more appropriately clothed women. I was shocked. His hostility had been so palpable and so intense, and had in it such a flavor of his sense of privilege to judge me, his sense of his own righteousness and my folly and shame, that I had a moment of disorientation and had to check in on myself. Was I in fact behaving and dressed appropriately? I reminded myself that according to the mores and values of my American culture in that American place, everything I was doing, the way I was dressed, even my being alone and unescorted as a woman, even the presence of my pet dog was perfectly culturally appropriate. Then I saw his son or son-in-law, the younger man, who had by now walked into the water where children were swimming and wading. The younger man was wearing his white underrobe. Since I had last looked his way, he had left the 4-year-old girl back at the picnic table with the women, and he was now holding a 6-month-old baby who was wearing nothing but a diaper. I braced myself. Is he going to check the baby's diaper before he puts the baby into the water? I wondered. He did not check the baby's diaper. There was no woman of his near enough to him to remind him. But enjoying the cool depths around him that were soaking his robe, sure enough, the man dipped the baby, full diaper or clean diaper, diaper and all, right into the water. All around him swam kids. They were ducking their heads underwater, taking water in their mouths and spewing it like little whales and splashing about as kids do. Within minutes, the other parents had called their children out of the water, which may or may not at this point have been contaminated with fecal matter. The man in his robe and his baby now had the lovely cool water entirely to themselves. Neither of these men, it was clear, was thinking, what are the norms of this place in which I now find myself? I will learn about them and conform to them. I felt awful, and the kids lost their waiting area. There had been a silent clash of cultures. The values of the newcomers had won out. We, the Americans, had lost out. This all was, of course, a metaphor. And I will just pause there to say that, I didn't elaborate on this in the essay, which is not yet over, but it's this issue of hygiene and sewage is not trivial, and it's not racist to talk about this. Okay, it's not. I'm not saying other cultures are innately dirty. I'm not. However, I wrote about this in my book Outrages. It took hundreds of years for the West to realize that you should separate sewage and drinking water and washing water and bathing water. Hundreds of years. People used to, sewers flowed in London in Dickens' time directly into the into the Thames. And same thing in Paris, the sewage went into the Seine. I'm sure it's true in America as well. Sewage was not separated from drinking, bathing water, other water sources for human use. It took the construction of an elaborate sewage system in London under the guidance of a man named Joseph Bazalgette to finally separate fecal matter, sewage, from drinking and bathing water and laundry water. And it was a massive undertaking, and it immediately positively affected rates of cholera and typhus, and ended the waves of horrible bacterial epidemics and viral epidemics that would sweep through London, or made them more manageable. And there was another huge push in America in the early teens into the 20s in cities to create better hygiene, better sanitation, and to teach immigrants how to stay clean, basically, according to what American hygienic science had at that point established. It was considered a science, the science of sanitation. That's why our garbage collectors are called sanitation workers, right? Because they are maintaining Western levels of sanitation. It doesn't mean we're better, but it does mean it took hundreds of years for us to figure some stuff out. Now, for whatever reason, many parts of the rest of the world don't share those norms around sanitation. And it's not for lack of people trying to introduce them. Even, whether it's leaders in India trying to clear up sanitation issues in rural India, or to encourage people to put their garbage in dumps instead of just leave it on the street, all the way to the millions, if not billions of dollars spent in NGOs that go to countries all over sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, rural Pakistan, various like less developed countries, rural India, right, to try to solve the problem of people defecating and bathing in the same water and drinking from the water in which they defecate. And there are many countries in which there is no plumbing, right? Toilets don't flush, people don't have indoor plumbing. That still exists. So my point is, in many, many, many NGOs, and I can, back this up with a footnote in this essay if you guys wonder about it, or if you think I'm being mean, no amount of NGOs saying, hey, don't defecate in the water supply, defecate in this porta potty, or throw your garbage over here in this dump. It's not working. It's not working. For whatever reason, cultural norms are very, deep, and without being raised in an environment in which to wash your hands after you use the bathroom, or there's running water to wash your hands, or there's soap to wash your hands, or you thoroughly know from watching other people and being raised this way that you don't defecate and urinate in the drinking water, you're just still going to, many people are still going to defecate and urinate in the drinking water. And that is not a racist thing to say. And I can, post in the link the NGOs that are still trying to solve this problem. It's still a problem. Cholera, typhus, waterborne illnesses are still constantly taking lives in the less developed world because people still don't separate their, fecal and urinary functions from their drinking and bathing. Okay. So this guy's not being gross or weird in his cultural context, but 200 years of the West figuring out modern sanitation and its impact on disease, and then raising children to flush the toilet, go to the toilet in the toilet, not in the swimming pool, right? It is at risk of being wiped away because, again, culturally, no amount of building facilities and instructing people in many parts of the world, not all, where these norms had been prevalent, is making a difference. And when I was in Morocco 15 or 20 years ago, maybe things have totally changed, but in rural Morocco, beautiful, cool part of the world, people were still, defecating and urinating in the river where other people were washing their clothes and bathing and getting drinking water. The Ganges always faces this issue, right? It's constant. Like they put dead bodies in or the ashes of dead bodies in the Ganges. I mean, we could go on and on, but it's not trivial. I mean, I didn't list all the times in this essay that a cab driver from another culture has stopped and just opened the door and urinated, in front of me. I mean, that actually happened. Or I saw another cab driver take his little daughter and hold her over the gutter to defecate, and many construction sites where people are from other cultures stink of urine these days because in other places, lots of Latin America, no disrespect to Latin America, if there's not a toilet handy, people do urinate in alleyways. Men do. Even women do sometimes, at great risk to themselves, because people are raped when they do that. But anyway, it's a totally different culture around where you urinate and defecate in many parts of the world. And it's naive and silly and dangerous not to recognize, that we were there. And for whatever reason, historically, we figured it out 200 years ago. And now in the West, people separate, toilet water from drinking water. But you can't it's called mirror image. You can't project that instinct all over the world. You have to be raised in it from childhood in order to treat it as second nature. So that is a riff that I didn't put in this essay, but it's in the backdrop of, what's at issue when someone, puts feces in a water supply where people are bathing. All right, here's the rest of the essay. There's more. Okay, let me get to it. Every day I bump up against the fact that many of the other cultures that are crowding en masse into our own culture do not share our cultural values. When I took a trip to DC by train, I paid for a purchase at the Moynihan Train Hall, CVS. I asked politely for a bag. The cashier ignored me. I asked again, politely. I heard you the first time, she snapped. It was an unpleasant moment and one that no courtesy of mine could have avoided. In American culture, you acknowledge, even with a grunt, when you hear someone. By ignoring a request, though, a little moment that could have been pleasant or neutral turned into a moment of conflict. I have had many, many experiences of getting into Lyfts or Ubers and asking drivers who are immigrants from certain West African countries to take a specific route. I'm always braced now when I do, as about 90% of the time there will be an argument. Sometimes it is a scary argument with gesticulating and shouting on the part of the driver, the gist of which is that the driver knows what he is doing and who am I to tell him the better route. I have come to the conclusion that men in certain West African cultures do not culturally accept women giving them directions. By the way, I just want to show you an ad. This is very interesting. This is a neighborhood. He's running for office in a neighborhood that has a high population of people from these cultures, and he's running as male state committee member district leader, Anthony Beckford. Male state committee member district leader. Like, why is that relevant? I don't know. I'm going to call and find out. But anyway, UN women. So am I being racist in observing that I keep having this argument, no matter how polite I am and respectful, which I am? UN Women Africa, West and Central Africa states that, quote, while legal frameworks exist to empower women in West and Central Africa, the daily reality for many remains a struggle against traditional power structures that limit their access to rights and decision-making roles, end quote. Exactly what I was up against in the Uber and Lyft, pardon me. UN Women declares further, quote, women's leadership and participation estimated by political representation in parliament averages at 11.6%. Women are excluded. So almost 9 out of 10 positions of leadership in those nations are held by men. Women are excluded from issues and decisions that affect their lives, mainly due to high poverty levels, illiteracy, and patriarchy. They just say it. Women have limited access to productive assets and market opportunities. The religious and cultural context exhibits, they don't say Islam, right? But whatever the religion is, and cultural context exhibits tension between customary law and formal legislation. In other words, no matter what the laws say on paper, those aren't the rights women get in practice. In that context, cases of VAWG, violence against women and girls, are widespread with little or no access to justice. Violence against women is still a serious problem with high prevalence of rape and harmful traditional practices. Incidents of FGM, female genital mutilation, early and forced marriages, and torture of widows still occur. And in parentheses, it says CAR, Cameroon, DRC, that's Democratic Republic of Congo, Gabon, and Chad, denying young women and girls equality of opportunities, as well as leading to high rate of maternal mortality. And there's the link, of course. And this is me talking again. If women in Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Mali, Nigeria, Republic of Guinea, Senegal, and Sierra Leone do not have decision-making powers or the effective legal right not to be beaten or raped in their own home nations, why should my stepping with my American female self into a man's cab, if he hails from these regions, change his entire worldview and orientation about women and decision-making? And there's a link. It is foolish and kind of demeaning of the power and depth of his worldview to assume that my mere Western presence changes everything that a man from these regions is likely to believe about the status of women in relation to his own right to dominate them. I repeat that this concern of mine about the treatment of women by many men from West and Central African cultures, a concern that also preoccupies the UN and NGOs led by Central and West African women themselves in countries in that region, is not a racist one, but a, quote, culturist one. Has nothing to do with race. How can the treatment of many women by many West and Central African men be a racist concern if many Central and West African women and NGOs are also concerned about it? Later on that same trip, I was seated in the food hall at Union Station in DC. A couple was about 20 feet away from me. The woman was listening to a loud conversation on her cell phone at top volume. I was seated a few feet away and was trying to read. I waited for the conversation to end. It didn't, so I caught her eye, smiled, and made the universal, "Do you mind turning down the volume?" gesture, and smiled again. She smiled back, immediately turned down the volume, and made the universal, "Sorry" expression. It was a completely pleasant and peaceful exchange. The man she was with, however, a West African man, immediately started shouting at me and gesticulating. "This is an exaggeration. You are exaggerating. The volume is not too loud. It is not up to you to decide the volume. There's plenty of room for you to move far away from us," and so on. The woman, who was African American, sought to shush her boyfriend, and then she made the universal, "Sorry, my boyfriend is being a jerk" face at me. I shrugged. We smiled at each other again. I made the universal, "Hey, we've all been there" expression, and I went on my way. The man was still shouting, and the woman was still trying to calm him down. I tell this anecdote at some risk of venturing into taboo territory because to me it shows clearly that worrying about these cultural incompatibilities of importing West African gender norms into America is not racist. The woman who reacted pleasantly to my request about her phone volume was Black. The man who was abusive to me was also Black. I am white. But our respective races were, in my view at least, utterly not the point. Her cultural choices about how to handle the moment were American, as were mine. His choice about how to handle the moment was not. My point is that when every path crossing, every request at an adjustment, or every effort to compromise turns into a moment of hostility or an escalated conflict, you immediately lose the coherent fabric of a society that has spent centuries developing ways to resolve conflict and to adjust competing social requests and expectations peaceably. A day that had, in a coherent Western culture, previously been full of people pleasantly enough making way for one another or reaching compromises or at least working things out, turns into a minefield, pitting one against one territorially forever. And if you import into a Western context millions of men who immediately escalate conflict with women because that is their culture, then immediately the status of the women in that host society is downgraded, and they lose rights, scope, and mobility as they seek to get through their days avoiding explosions, conflicts, or worse. Here is why it is racist to assume that you can simply put that furious Afghani patriarch on a plane and drop him in the middle of the Hudson Valley, or put that irritable West African man on a plane to DC. It is racist to assume that they and their fellow Afghani or West African men will immediately become evolved American men and will treat Western or American women with what we see as respect, no matter how we are dressed, or even if we have dogs with us, or even if we ask for a different taxi route, or heaven forbid, even if we ask for a lower volume on a nearby phone. It is racist to assume that simply being physically in the West dissolves alien cultures' home values and ideologies. Clearly it does not. It is racist to assume that Western cultures are so powerful and so right that they immediately or even quickly dilute the mores of Afghanistan, in which women have no right to education or property, or even to show their face, that they dilute the values of Niger or Liberia or Sierra Leone. The latter is a country in which rape is so common that when I was there reporting on the end of the Civil War, NGOs had invested a lot of money putting up billboards trying to persuade men in general not to rape women in general. I think it is racist to assume that simply living suddenly in the Hudson Valley will dissolve or erase decades of Afghani teachings presented to that stony-eyed, white-bearded man that women are chattel and that they must be covered from head to toe. If you drop me in Afghanistan, I may soon acquire the dress and language skills better to fit in. But in 10 years, I will no doubt still believe in the rights of individuals, in religious freedom, and I will still believe that women have the same human rights as do men. I will still believe in those things because that is my worldview, which is deeper than any sight change or any change in language and dress. Why should it be otherwise for the Afghani patriarch who finds himself and his family one day on a Hudson Valley lakeside? In 10 years, he will probably still believe that it is his job to shame and police my body, my being accompanied by my dog, and my freedom to loll around on a beach towel as I choose without a man nearby. Why should I expect my views to be any longer or more deeply held than his own? The worldviews of many men in Afghanistan or in Central and West Africa are deep, powerfully held worldviews. They don't vanish simply because many of these men encounter the Constitution or Hollywood movies or meet Western career women or find themselves and their families in Pennsylvania or Michigan or New York or Maine. It is racist to assume that they will. So I hope I've shown you that we are in a battle for our lives. There is nothing racist about waging this battle. You can throw open the gates of the West to people who deeply believe that women are less or that escalated conflict is a standard part of social negotiation. But there is no reason in history to think that your own culture will survive all of this. You will be the slaves and the chattel. Your culture of equality, law, tolerance, good humor, and civility will become a memory. And then the memory itself will die out. And when that happens, and it will happen quickly, it will have nothing to do with your race either. That is my essay. All right. Thank you all so much. Let's see if there are any comments. I see there are 14 comments. Lots of comments. Wow. So, Naomi, why don't you address how Jewish culture is incompatible and hostile to Western culture? Well, that is an interesting question. I would just note that Western culture comes out of Jewish culture, also out of Christian culture, which came out of Jewish culture, and out of Greece and Rome, the culture of Greece and Rome. That is the seedbed of Western culture. And the laws that we have in America find their moral basis in the Old Testament and then in the New Testament. I still believe in the separation of church and state in America. It's a very important value in our Constitution, but that's culturally where our laws come from. That's why we, eventually give women legal rights. It's why we eventually, ended slavery. It took a long time, but we lived up to what the Bible asks us to do. The other thing I would say is history shows that for 2,000 years, when Jews were kicked out of their own country, their own sovereign nation, they integrated very peacefully into countries around the world, including Arab majority Muslim countries, and were kicked out of them in 1948 for the most part. So history shows we blend, we fit in, we don't try to alter, we don't proselytize, we don't try to alter other people's religions or way of life. Let's see, Portugal, muitos problemos, for sure. Wow, we were in Porto in last April. Oh my gosh, I barely recognized it. And it didn't feel safe, and it wasn't Portuguese anymore. It was all people from Pakistan. No disrespect to people from Pakistan, but if I wanted to go to Pakistan, I would have gone to Pakistan. It didn't feel safe to be a woman. And I just missed Portuguese culture, that's why I went there. Let's see. Peter Martin says, that's just the problem. The people you're talking about do not believe that Western civilization has just as much of a right to exist. We love you, Naomi, but you make it so complicated by pandering and worrying about what everybody that you used to know in your liberal world your sensitive world, your wonderful world with rainbows and equality and joy and plenty, but that's not the world. The world is the world that you've uncovered through the dastardly, and I don't see the rest of the comment, sadly, the dastardly. I take your point. If you've got a second part of the comment, show me where it is, please, or repost it, because I can't see it. But look, this is true. I mean, this is a defensive essay, because in the world I left, just even raising this question is racist. And also I want to persuade the world I left, because they're the ones who are the danger, unless we get them on board, to see that this is not racist, to want to cherish our own culture and protect it. Racist people have to be careful not to sound racist. Cultural differences are self-evident. Nobody says these matters can't be discussed. Western culture is plural. America, you support Donald Trump. How are you a feminist? I don't quite get your point there, but thank you. Let's see. If it can't be discussed, how is it that you are discussing it? All peoples can be tortured and imprisoned, and I'm not terrified to say that. I'm terrified by the fact that Trump is trying to rely on ICE to win the next election. It has nothing to do with Western culture. Racism is not an accurate term. We are all human, and we will learn the cultures we are exposed to as a child and only later learn about others' cultures. Children from others' cultures frequently act just like their, I can't see the rest of these comments. It's like they go to another place. I'll ask my producer. How am I discussing it? Well, I think it can't be discussed because the only people who are reprinting this essay are independent media or conservative media. And the places I used to publish won't touch it. I'm sure I'll submit it to show you, but I'm sure The Guardian and the New York Times won't, run this essay. And you have a different view than I do about how easily other cultures assimilate with ours. But I hear you. Let's see. We need to teach people. Okay. Slavica says rightly, we need to teach people that they have power over their representatives and that they have power and can make a difference for sure, especially in Britain. Like, I think we figured it out in America. We don't do it enough, but they literally have forgotten how to lobby and press for legislation and use their legal system to stop bad legislation, strengthen the power of councils. It's shocking. And they better relearn quickly. Rose Kelleher, my dear friend. Naomi, I watched this earlier in the week. It was an excellent and poignant essay. Thank you. God bless you and Brian. Please, God, your mobility will improve. I hope so too. I'm tired of limping around. Thank you, Rose Kelleher. Oh yeah, God did tell us thousands of years ago how to keep our waste apart from our water. So true. It's in Exodus. Also how to deal with plague. I knew someone would talk about the hair. Slavica, you missed my earlier caveat where I said, don't criticize my hair today. I didn't have time to spray it away from my face. But duly noted, I know it's distracting, and next time I will use a bangs, whatever, barrette or hair thing. Thank you. McGaw goes there and says, if by culturist you mean illegal and mass immigration, paint me racist. I don't think it's good. I respect your kind of standing on your principle, but I would be reluctant to have people embrace the term racism because I don't want to, I think something that's beautiful about American society at its best is that it's not racist. We're a very unracist country compared to other countries. But I hear you. Ew, that's gross. Let's skip that. That's kind of disgusting. My hair is wet from a shower. Let's see, any other comments that I see here? Here we go. The Zionist perspective is a losing ideology. The whole world wants to crush it for how arrogant it is, That's not really a fact. It's an emotion. You've hung your hat on that ideology, Naomi. Now your movement censors people through endless accusations of anti-Semitism. None of that is what I'm doing. I don't agree with this comment. I think it's interesting that you bring it up without any evidence. I don't get how there are like over 50 Arab Muslim countries that are theocracies that don't give religious minorities, including Jews, equal rights, and that's fine. But Israel, which does give its 2 million Arab citizens equal rights and voting rights and political parties and representation in parliament, isn't fine. I just don't get that. It seems like a double standard. And then people revert to emotional arguments like they're arrogant. Like, what does that even mean? And I do agree that the whole world is obsessed with Jews in Israel, especially now. And I'm trying to address that by my Geneva Bible readings, where I read through the Hebrew Torah so you can hear what God said about what the group of people that became the Jews, if you believe that that's a sacred text, which Christians are supposed to believe, and even Muslims are supposed to believe that Christianity is one of the sacred religions. I never censor people. People can say whatever they want. If someone's being an anti-Semite, I tell them why I think they're being an anti-Semite, as I did with Tucker Carlson, and sadly, my dear friend, whom I still haven't spoken to directly, Emerald Robinson. The things they've been posting are anti-Semitic, and I'm not censoring anyone. I invite more and more conversation and more knowledge and sharing. I've spent 2 years reading through the Hebrew Bible in Hebrew on video so that everyone can know what Jews actually believe, right? And what God actually intended, if you believe it's a sacred text for the children of Israel and for the Holy Land in relation to the children of Israel. I invite people to go to Chabad. I invite people to go to their Jewish friends' houses for Shabbat dinner. Like, I never censor anyone. That's not true. That is, I guess, it. We've come to the end of our time together. Thank you. And this was interesting. Lots and lots of comments. I guess it's time to have this conversation. And let's go ahead and thank my sponsor, our sponsors who make this possible, and tell you about them. American Alternative Assets is one. Right now, we're watching 2 global flashpoints unfold at the same time. The takedown of El Mencha has thrown Mexico into chaos, and U.S.-Iran military tensions are escalating faster than anything we've seen in years. Here's what most people don't realize. Every time global instability spikes like this, one asset surges, and that is gold. It happened after 9/11. It happened during the 2008 financial crisis. It happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, and it's happening again right now. There's a new free report called the Global Crisis Playbook that lays out exactly what's going on and what it means for your retirement. It includes a step-by-step guide to moving your retirement into physical gold, tax-free and penalty-free, plus a 7-point checklist experts say every retiree should complete before the next crisis hits. You're not going to hear this on the evening news, but if you have a 401k, IRA, or any retirement savings, this is worth reading. Download it free at cloutgold.com or call 855-803-GOLD to get your copy mailed to you. That's Clout, CLOUTGOLD.com or 855-803-GOLD. And let me ask you something. When a big IPO hits the market and jumps 30% on day one, who really made the money? Because after 45 years in the markets, here's the truth. By the time the opening bell rings, Wall Street insiders have already positioned themselves. Venture funds, institutional capital, the well-connected crowd. They buy in years before the headlines. While companies are still private, then IPO day becomes a media spectacle, hype, momentum, fear of missing out. But that's not early. That's only after early investors have already seen the biggest gains. For decades, access to pre-IPO growth was limited to insiders. That's beginning to change. Today, there are regulated ways for everyday investors to gain exposure before the bell, before the frenzy. If you'd like to learn how it works, go to preIPObackdoor.com. That's preIPObackdoor.com, because when the crowd shows up, the real fortunes may already be gone. Thank you to our sponsors. Again, if you like and care about these essays, independent journalism, independent interviews that I bring to you, or over on Daily Clout, Bill Cam and Legisector, which let you track, change, benefit from knowing the inside scoop about live state and federal legislation. These are things no one else brings you except Outspoken and Daily Clout. And we really need your support. So go over to Substack, to Outspoken. Yes, I'll get a Barrette. And please, we've got like 112,000 total subscribers. Fewer than 4% are paying subscribers. So if you want to keep this material flowing into the public discourse and it makes a difference, reaches 1.4 million people on all platforms a month, I really need your help. If you can afford to become a paying subscriber, which is $7 a month or $70 a year, a savings of $14. If you subscribe for a year, please do subscribe. And if you can afford to become a founding member, it's $210 a year. And I will send you a book, a signed copy of the Pfizer papers for a donation of $100 or more. And so go over to Daily Clout. You can make a one-time donation. Again, if you donate $100 or more, we will send you a book. Be sure to email me at naomi@dailyclout.io, your mailing address. And I'll sign a book and send it to you for a $100 donation or more. We urgently need your help. We are running on very little to keep production going, but making a giant impact, and we can only do it with you. So that's dailyclout.io. You can subscribe or donate, and over on Substack, it's Outspoken. Please subscribe as a paid subscriber or make a one-time donation. Love you guys. Thank you, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Oh, yes, tomorrow day is not yet Shabbat.